Hello and welcome to where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Tonight we step into the fog-laden streets of Victorian London where the gas lamps flicker and the shadows hide secrets. Join me for Blood on the Steps of Buckingham Hall, a Sherlock Holmes mystery that will keep you guessing until the final deduction. Chapter 1. A Knock at Midnight. It was a bleak November evening in 1888, and the fog had descended upon London like a living thing, wrapping Baker Street in a thick yellow veil that dulled the city's pulse to a murmur. Inside our rooms at 221B, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm shadows across walls cluttered with maps, newspaper clippings, and the eclectic tools of Sherlock Holmes's trade. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the writing desk, my pen scratching out the details of a recent case for the Strand magazine, though my thoughts strayed to the comfort of the fire and the prospect of a late supper. Holmes lounged in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes half closed in that peculiar state of reverie that often preceded his most incisive deductions. His violin lay abandoned on a nearby table, its bow dangling over the edge, a silent testament to his restless mind. The clock on the mantelpiece had just struck midnight when a sharp, urgent knock at the door shattered the quiet. I glanced at Holmes, whose eyes snapped open, gleaming with sudden alertness. "A caller at this hour?" I murmured, setting down my pen. The lateness suggested urgency, perhaps peril, and I felt the familiar stir of anticipation that accompanied the start of a new adventure. Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile as though he had been waiting for such an interruption. "Whoever it is, Watson, they bring a matter of consequence," he said, his voice low and precise. The knock, 3 deliberate raps yet with a tremor, betrays a hand both resolute and afraid. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps ascended the stairs, accompanied by the soft rustle of skirts. She appeared at the door, her face etched with the mild indignation of one disturbed from her evening rest. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," she said, her tone tinged with disapproval. "She insists it's urgent but won't give her name. Shall I turn her away?" "On the contrary, Mrs. Hudson, show her in at once," Holmes replied, rising with a fluid grace. He adjusted his dressing gown and cast me a glance, his eyes alight with curiosity. "A lady who calls at midnight, cloaked in secrecy, promises a case worth our attention." Mrs. Hudson withdrew, and moments later a woman entered our sitting room. She was tall, her figure elegant despite the damp, dark cloak that clung to her. A black veil obscured her face, lending her an air of mystery, and her gloved hands clutched a handkerchief stained with dark, ominous marks. Blood, I realized with a start. She hesitated in the doorway as though weighing whether to advance or flee, until Holmes gestured to the chair opposite his own. "Pray be seated, madam," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "You have come to us in distress, and you will find no better confidants in London. This is Dr. Watson, my friend and colleague, and I am Sherlock Holmes. What brings you here at such an hour?" The lady sank into the chair, her movements graceful but betraying a nervous tension. She lifted her veil, revealing a pale, refined face with large, expressive eyes that darted between Holmes and me. Her features bore the marks of recent grief. Her lips trembled and her cheeks were flushed with suppressed emotion. "My name is Lady Beatrice Langley," she said, her voice low and quavering yet resolute. "I come to you, Mr. Holmes, because I am in desperate need of your aid. My brother, Lord Reginald Langley, was found dead this morning on the steps of Buckingham Hall, our family seat near Westminster. The police call it an accident, but I am certain, beyond all doubt, that he was murdered." I leaned forward, my medical instincts roused by the mention of a suspicious death. "Murdered, Lady Beatrice? What evidence suggests foul play?" She clasped her hands tightly, the blood-stained handkerchief crumpling in her grip. My brother was not a man to stumble drunkenly downstairs, as the police claim. He was cautious, in excellent health, and rarely indulged in excess. Yet at dawn, he was found at the foot of the grand staircase, his skull fractured, a pool of blood staining the marble. There was something unnatural about it, Mr. Holmes. His face, his eyes were wide, fixed in a stare of horror, as though he had seen something dreadful before he died. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his interest fully engaged. Describe this expression precisely, if you please. Every detail matters. Lady Beatrice hesitated, her gaze falling to the handkerchief. His eyes were open, unblinking, as if frozen in terror. His mouth was contorted and his body was rigid, not limp as one might expect from a fall. There was a struggle, I'm sure of it, and this... She held up the handkerchief, its crimson stains stark against the white linen. I found it near his body, hidden beneath his coat. It is not mine, nor was it his. I believe it belongs to the one responsible. Holmes took the handkerchief, examining it with his magnifying glass. Fresh blood, not yet fully dried, he murmured. The fabric is fine, embroidered with the initials CL. Most curious. And you say the police dismiss this as an accident? Yes, she replied, her voice rising with indignation. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard insists Reginald was inebriated, tripped, and fell. But my brother was troubled in recent days, Mr. Holmes. He spoke of a letter he received, one that caused him great agitation. I saw it only briefly, but it bore a strange symbol, a crimson circle with a dagger through it. Holmes's head snapped up, his expression intense. A crimson circle with a dagger. You are certain? Yes, she said, nodding vigorously. I urged him to tell me more, but he refused, saying it was too dangerous. The letter vanished from his study soon after, and now he is dead. Mr. Holmes, I fear a shadow hangs over my family, a conspiracy that threatens us all. Will you help me uncover the truth? Holmes leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. The letter is a significant detail, he said almost to himself. And the handkerchief with its initials suggests a connection yet to be explored. Tell me, Lady Beatrice, who resides at Buckingham Hall, and had your brother any known enemies? She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The household consists of myself, my cousin Charles Langley, and a small staff. Our butler, Mr. Grayson, a maid named Emily, the cook, Mrs. Harrow, and a footman, Tom. Charles and Reginald were close, though they quarreled recently over the inheritance. As for enemies, Reginald was a prominent figure, a former officer in the East India Company. His wealth and influence bred envy, but he never spoke of specific threats. His recent unease, however, was unmistakable. Holmes nodded, his mind clearly racing. And the staircase where he was found. Describe it. It is a grand marble staircase, she said, leading from the entrance hall to the upper floors. The steps are wide, polished with a wrought iron railing. The hall is vast, with tall windows and ancestral portraits. The servants' quarters are nearby, and the wine cellar lies beneath, accessible through a locked door. Holmes's eyes gleamed. A locked door, you say? And who holds the key? Mr. Grayson, she replied. He oversees the household and keeps all keys. Very well, Holmes said, rising. Lady Beatrice, you have done well to come to me. This case presents points of interest. The blood-stained handkerchief, the missing letter, and the questionable circumstances of your brother's death. I shall take it up at once. Watson, we depart for Buckingham Hall at first light. Lady Beatrice, return home and speak to no one of our involvement. Discretion is paramount. She rose, her face a mix of relief and lingering fear. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I shall do as you say. But please be swift. I fear the shadow that took my brother may strike again. As she departed, her cloak trailing like a specter in the fog, I turned to Holmes. "What do you make of it? A murder disguised as an accident?" "Precisely, Watson," he replied, lighting his pipe. "The blood, the symbol, the handkerchief all suggest a deeper plot. The crimson circle and dagger may point to a secret society or a personal vendetta cloaked in symbolism. Tomorrow we shall see the steps of Buckingham Hall. They hold more secrets than Lady Beatrice imagines." The rain continued outside, the fog pressing closer, as though conspiring to hide the truth. But with Holmes at my side, I knew no mystery could remain unsolved for long. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The morning following Lady Beatrice Langley's midnight visit dawned cold and dreary, with a fog so dense it seemed to cling to the very cobblestones of London. Sherlock Holmes and I set out early from 221B Baker Street, the clatter of our hansom cab's wheels muffled by the oppressive mist. Holmes was silent during the journey, his sharp features set in that intense, inward gaze that signified his mind was already dissecting the case. I, too, was preoccupied, my thoughts turning to the blood-stained handkerchief and the mysterious crimson circle and dagger symbol Lady Beatrice had described. What secrets lay hidden in Buckingham Hall, and what shadow had claimed Lord Reginald Langley's life? We arrived at Buckingham Hall, a stately manor on the outskirts of Westminster, its towering silhouette barely discernible through the fog. The house stood like a sentinel of bygone grandeur, its stone walls adorned with ivy, its tall windows reflecting the dim light of gas lamps. The grand marble staircase, the scene of Lord Reginald's demise, dominated the entrance, its steps gleaming save for the dark, irregular stain that marked the third step from the bottom. The sight sent a chill through me, not merely from the cold but from the grim reality of the tragedy it represented. Holmes alighted from the cab with his usual energy, his eyes scanning the surroundings before settling on the steps. "Come, Watson," he said, his voice brisk. "The scene of a crime is a canvas, and every mark upon it tells a story. Let us see what tale these steps have to tell." I followed him, my medical bag in hand, though I suspected my skills would be of little use here. The air was damp, carrying the faint tang of the nearby Thames, and the fog lent an almost spectral quality to the scene. Holmes crouched beside the stained step, his magnifying glass poised as he examined the blood with meticulous care. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing to the dark smear. "The blood has pooled in an irregular pattern, not the uniform spread one would expect from a simple fall. See here, the edges are disturbed as though something or someone brushed against it before it dried." I leaned closer, noting the peculiar shape of the stain. "Could it have been a servant cleaning the scene?" I ventured. Holmes shook his head. "Unlikely. The disturbance is too precise, too localized. And look here." He pointed to a faint scuff mark on the adjacent step, barely visible to the naked eye. "This is no ordinary shoe mark. The pattern suggests a boot with a distinctive tread, not the polished shoes of a gentleman or the soft soles of a servant's footwear. And here," he moved to the wrought iron railing where a small chip in the paint caught his eye. "This damage is fresh, Watson, likely from a struggle or a blow." I frowned, trying to piece together the implications. "So you believe Lord Reginald was struck before he fell?" "Possibly," Holmes replied, his tone guarded. "But we must not leap to conclusions. Facts, Watson, facts are our foundation. Now note this." He knelt again, his gloved fingers brushing the edge of the step. A faint smear of mud, almost imperceptible but distinct in its composition. It is not the common London clay, but a reddish hue, likely from the banks of the Thames near the docks. Curious for a man who, according to Lady Beatrice, did not leave the house that night. Before I could respond, the heavy oak doors of Buckingham Hall creaked open, and Inspector Lestrade emerged, his wiry frame bundled in a greatcoat. His expression was one of weary resignation, tempered with a hint of irritation at our presence. "Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, tipping his hat. "I might have known you'd turn up. This is a simple matter, I assure you." Lord Reginald Langley was deep in his cups, took a tumble down the stairs and cracked his skull. A tragic accident, nothing more. Holmes's lips curled into a faint, sardonic smile. "An accident, Lestrade? Then perhaps you can explain the presence of Thames mud on these steps when Lord Reginald was indoors all evening, or the chipped railing suggesting a struggle, or indeed the irregular blood pattern which contradicts the physics of a mere fall." Lestrade's face reddened, but he held his ground. "Mud can be tracked in by anyone, servants, visitors. As for the railing, it's an old house, Holmes. Things wear down. And the blood. A man falls, he bleeds. You're making mountains out of molehills." Holmes's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Molehills, Lestrade? I find them to be the very peaks of truth. But come, let us see the interior. The steps are but the prologue. The true story lies within." We entered the grand hall, a cavernous space adorned with ancestral portraits and heavy chandeliers. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and wax, and the tall windows admitted only slivers of gray light through the fog. The staircase rose majestically before us, its marble steps leading to a shadowed upper landing. I could not help but imagine Lord Reginald's final moments, his body crumpling on the cold stone, his eyes wide with that horror Lady Beatrice had described. Holmes paused at the foot of the stairs, his gaze sweeping the hall. "The acoustics here are remarkable," he remarked. A cry or a struggle would have echoed, yet Lady Beatrice heard nothing. "Curious, and this—" He pointed to a small table near the entrance where a silver candlestick lay slightly askew. "This has been moved recently. The dust beneath it is disturbed, and the angle is unnatural for a decorative piece." I followed his gaze, marveling at his ability to see significance in the mundane. "Could it have been knocked over during the incident?" I asked. "Possibly," Holmes said, "but its position suggests it was deliberately replaced, perhaps to conceal something. We shall see." He turned to Lestrade. "Where was the body found precisely?" Lestrade gestured to the third step. "Right there, sprawled across the steps, head down. The servants found him at dawn. No signs of robbery. His watch and wallet were untouched." Holmes nodded, his eyes darting to the upper landing. "And who was in the house that night?" "Lady Beatrice, her cousin Charles Langley, the butler Grayson, a maid named Emily, and a few other staff," Lestrade replied. "All claimed to have been abed, heard nothing until morning." Holmes's expression was unreadable, but I knew his mind was cataloging every detail. "Very well," he said. "Watson, let us examine the study. Lady Beatrice mentioned a missing letter, and I suspect it holds the key to this affair." We ascended the staircase, careful to avoid the stained step, and entered Lord Reginald's study, a room of dark wood and leather-bound books. A large desk dominated the space, cluttered with papers, an inkwell, and a half-burned candle. Holmes moved with purpose, his fingers tracing the edges of the desk, the bookshelves, the window frame. "The letter with the crimson circle and dagger," he murmured. "If it was here, it was taken deliberately. But why?" I examined the room, noting the heavy curtains, the faint scent of tobacco, and a small fireplace with ashes still warm. "Could the letter have been burned?" I suggested. Holmes shook his head. "Unlikely. The ashes are from ordinary paper, not the fine stock Lady Beatrice described. No. The letter was removed, and recently." He paused, his gaze falling on a small drawer in the desk, its lock scratched. "This has been tampered with," he said, producing a small tool and deftly opening it. Inside was nothing but a single sheet of blotting paper bearing faint traces of ink. Holmes held it to the light, his eyes narrowing. A mirror image of writing, Watson. Not the letter itself, but perhaps a clue to its contents. We shall analyze this later. For now, the mud, the blood, and the chipped railing tell us this was no accident. Someone in this house knows more than they admit. As we descended the stairs, I felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon me. The fog outside seemed to seep into the very walls of Buckingham Hall, concealing truths we had only begun to uncover. Holmes, however, was undaunted, his mind already racing ahead to the next clue. Chapter 3. The Servant's Whispers. The fog that clung to Buckingham Hall seemed to seep into its very walls as Sherlock Holmes and I descended from Lord Reginald Langley's study, our minds heavy with the clues we had uncovered. The irregular bloodstain on the marble steps, the Thames mud, the chipped railing, and the tampered desk drawer. These fragments of evidence pointed to a deliberate act, not the accident Inspector Lestrade so readily accepted. Holmes, as was his wont, betrayed no sign of doubt, his sharp features set in quiet determination as he led the way to the servants' quarters. "The heart of a household, Watson," he remarked, "beats not in its grand halls, but in the whispers of those who serve it. Let us see what secrets the staff of Buckingham Hall conceal." The servants' hall was a stark contrast to the opulent grandeur of the main house. Its low ceiling and rough stone walls were warmed only by a modest fire in the grate, and the air carried the faint scent of damp wool and boiled cabbage. A long table dominated the room, its surface scarred from years of use, and around it sat the household staff. Mr. Grayson, the butler, a tall, gaunt man with a severe expression. Emily, the young maid Lady Beatrice had mentioned, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. A cook, Mrs. Harrow, stout and red-faced, and a footman, Tom, a lanky youth who avoided Holmes's gaze. The atmosphere was thick with unease, as though the shadow of Lord Reginald's death hung over them all. Holmes took his place at the head of the table, his posture deceptively relaxed, though his eyes missed nothing. I stood near the door, my notebook open, ready to record any detail that might prove significant. "Good morning," Holmes began, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of authority. "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. We are here to investigate the death of Lord Reginald Langley. I trust you will answer my questions with candor, for the truth has a way of revealing itself whether we will it or not." Mr. Grayson straightened, his thin lips pursed. "We've already spoken to the police, Mr. Holmes," he said, his tone clipped. "It was a tragic accident. Lord Reginald fell, nothing more." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "So I have heard. Yet certain details, the blood, the mud, the state of the railing, suggest otherwise. Let us begin with you, Mr. Grayson. As butler, you oversee the household. What was Lord Reginald's demeanor in the days before his death?" Grayson's eyes flickered, but his voice remained steady. "His lordship was preoccupied. He spent much time in his study, receiving few visitors. He seemed agitated, though he did not confide in me. It was not my place to pry." Holmes nodded, his gaze shifting to Emily, who sat at the far end of the table, her hands clasped tightly. "And you, Emily? Did you notice anything unusual about your master's behavior?" The maid's cheeks flushed, and her eyes darted toward the locked door to the wine cellar, a gesture so fleeting I might have missed it had Holmes not trained me to observe. He was quieter than usual, sir," she stammered. "Kept to himself mostly. I heard him arguing with Mr. Charles, his cousin, 2 nights ago. It was late, and I was passing the study." Holmes leaned forward, his interest piqued. "An argument, you say? About what?" Emily hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron. "I couldn't hear much, sir. Something about money. An inheritance, I think. Mr. Charles was angry, shouting about being cheated. He left in a huff, slamming the door. I jotted this down, my mind racing. Charles Langley, Lady Beatrice had mentioned, was a cousin and potential heir. A dispute over inheritance could provide a motive, though I wondered if Emily's nervous demeanor hinted at more. Holmes, too, seemed to note her unease, for his eyes lingered on her before moving to the cook. "Mrs. Harrow," he said, "did you overhear this quarrel or any other unusual activity?" The cook shook her head vigorously, her jowls trembling. "I keep to my kitchen, sir. I heard nothing, saw nothing. Lord Reginald ate sparingly of late, but that's all I know." Holmes's gaze flicked to the footman, Tom, who shifted uncomfortably. "And you, young man? You move about the house freely. What have you seen?" Tom swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Nothing out of the ordinary, sir. I was abed when it happened. Didn't hear a thing." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I knew he was cataloging every word, every gesture. He rose and paced slowly along the table, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us consider the night of Lord Reginald's death. The household was asleep, yet someone, or something, left mud on the marble steps, mud from the Thames docks. Mr. Grayson, you hold the keys to the house. Was any door left unlocked?" Grayson bristled. "Never, sir. I lock every door myself each night. The house was secure." "Yet mud was found," Holmes said, his tone mild but probing. "And a candlestick in the hall was askew as though moved in haste. Could a servant perhaps have been abroad that night?" A murmur ran through the group, and Emily's eyes darted again to the locked door. Holmes paused beside her, his voice softening. "Emily, you seem troubled. Is there something you wish to tell me? Something about that door, perhaps?" The maid's face paled, and she shook her head vehemently. "No, sir, it's just the wine cellar, nothing important. It's always locked, and Mr. Grayson keeps the key." Holmes's eyes narrowed, but he did not press her further. Instead, he turned to Grayson. "I should like to see the wine cellar, if you please. Its proximity to the staircase intrigues me." Grayson's jaw tightened, but he produced a ring of keys from his pocket. "There's nothing to see, Mr. Holmes. Just bottles and barrels, but if you insist—" Holmes waved a hand dismissively. "Later, perhaps. For now, let us focus on the household's movements. Who was the last to see Lord Reginald alive?" Mrs. Harrow spoke up. "I brought him a tray of tea at 9 o'clock, sir. He was in his study writing letters, looked tired, but that's all." Holmes nodded, his mind clearly racing. "And the letter Lady Beatrice mentioned, with the crimson circle and dagger. Did any of you see it?" A heavy silence fell. The servants exchanged glances, but none spoke. Finally, Grayson said, "I know nothing of any letter, sir. His lordship received much correspondence, but I never saw such a symbol." Holmes's gaze returned to Emily, who seemed to shrink under his scrutiny. "Very well," he said at last. "You have been most cooperative. Watson, let us return to the hall. There are yet more questions to be answered." As we left the servants' hall, I could not shake the feeling that Emily's nervousness concealed a vital clue. Holmes, too, seemed preoccupied, his fingers tapping a rhythm on his walking stick. "The maid knows something, Watson," he murmured as we reached the grand hall. "Her glances at the cellar door betray her. And Grayson, his composure is too perfect, too practiced. We must watch them both." I nodded, glancing back at the servants' hall. "And the argument between Charles and Lord Reginald? Could Charles be our man?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A possibility, but not a certainty. An inheritance dispute is a common motive, yet the mud, the blood, the letter, these suggest a deeper plot. We need more data, Watson. The wine cellar, I suspect, holds a piece of the puzzle. But for now, we must tread carefully." The truth is like the fog outside. It obscures, but it cannot hide forever. As we stepped back into the grand hall, the portraits of the Langley ancestors seemed to watch us, their painted eyes heavy with secrets. The fog pressed against the windows, and the distant chime of a church bell echoed through the mist. I felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the growing certainty that Buckingham Hall was a house of shadows and that Holmes alone could pierce its darkness. Chapter 4. A Trail in the Fog. The clues uncovered at Buckingham Hall, the Thames mud on the marble steps, the irregular bloodstain, the chipped railing, and the nervous glances of the maid Emily, had set Sherlock Holmes's mind ablaze with possibilities. As we returned to the grand hall after our interviews with the servants, Holmes paused, his gaze fixed on the faint smear of reddish clay he had noted earlier. "Watson," he said, his voice low and urgent, "this mud is no mere accident of the weather. It hails from the Thames docks, a place Lord Reginald had no reason to visit. Someone brought it here, and I intend to find out who." I nodded, my own thoughts racing. Could it be an outsider? A thief, perhaps, who entered the house? Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. An outsider, perhaps, but not a common thief. The mud, the locked cellar, the missing letter with its crimson circle and dagger, all point to a purpose more sinister than robbery. We must follow this trail, Watson, and the docks are our next destination, but we shall not go as ourselves. Disguise is in order. By late afternoon, we had transformed ourselves. Holmes donned a rough greatcoat, a flat cap pulled low over his brow, and a scarf that obscured half his face, giving him the air of a dock worker down on his luck. I followed suit, exchanging my gentleman's attire for a threadbare jacket and scuffed boots, though I felt distinctly out of place. "Holmes," I protested as we stepped into the fog-laden streets, "is this subterfuge truly necessary?" "Absolutely, Watson," he replied, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "The docks are a hive of secrets, and men speak freely when they believe no one of consequence is listening. We seek a connection to that mud and perhaps to the crimson seal Lady Beatrice described. Keep your wits about you." The journey to the Westminster docks was a descent into a grimmer London, where the fog mingled with the acrid smoke of factories and the stench of the river. Hansom cabs gave way to rattling carts, and the gas lamps grew sparse, their light swallowed by the mist. We alighted near a tavern called the Rusty Anchor, its sign creaking in the wind, its windows glowing with the dim promise of warmth. The establishment was a far cry from the elegance of Buckingham Hall, its exterior weathered by years of river damp, its interior a cacophony of rough voices and clinking tankards. Holmes led the way inside, his posture slouched to match his disguise, though his eyes missed nothing. The tavern was crowded with dock workers, sailors, and less savory types, their faces ruddy from drink and labor. We took a corner table, its surface sticky with spilled ale, and ordered pints to blend in. I sipped mine cautiously, my medical instincts recoiling at the murky liquid, while Holmes leaned back, his gaze sweeping the room like a hawk. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the din. "The man by the bar with the scarred cheek and the too fine coat. He's no ordinary laborer. His hands are calloused, but his nails are clean. A contradiction. And that group in the far corner whispering over a crumpled paper, they glance too often at the door." I followed his gaze, noting the man he described. He was broad-shouldered, with a weathered face marred by a jagged scar, and his coat, though worn, was of a quality ill-suited to the docks. "Could he be connected to the mud?" I whispered. "Possibly," Holmes replied, "but we must listen before we act. Patience, Watson." Our patience was rewarded when the scarred man, whom the barman called Baxter, began to boast loudly to a companion. His voice carried over the noise, slurred with drink. I tell you, mate, I had a job up at that fancy hall near Westminster. Big money it was, but I ain't saying more. Not with the peelers sniffing about." Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer, his pint untouched. I strained to hear, my heart quickening. Could Baxter be the source of the Thames mud? Had he been at Buckingham Hall the night of Lord Reginald's death? Baxter continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It was a gentleman, see? Paid me to keep an eye on the place. Had a fancy seal on his letter, crimson with a dagger through it. Said it was urgent, but I was in jail that night. Curse my luck, someone else got the job done." I glanced at Holmes, whose expression was one of intense concentration. The crimson seal matched Lady Beatrice's description, a vital clue. But Baxter's claim of being in jail suggested he was not the killer, though he might know who was. Holmes signaled me to remain silent, his fingers tapping a subtle rhythm on the table as he listened. The conversation shifted as Baxter's companion, a wiry man with a missing tooth, pressed for details. Who was this gentleman, then? Someone high up? Baxter shrugged, draining his pint. Didn't give a name. Met him in an alley, all cloaked like a ghost. Said the job was for a society, some old grudge. That's all I know, and it's more than you'll get out of me. Holmes's gaze sharpened, and he murmured to me, "A society, Watson. The Crimson Circle and dagger may indeed point to an organized group, perhaps tied to Lord Reginald's past. But Baxter's alibi must be verified. If he was in jail, he is a red herring, but his mention of a gentleman is a thread we must follow." As Baxter rose unsteadily, Holmes nodded toward the back door where a cloaked figure had just slipped out, unnoticed by the raucous crowd. "Come, Watson," he whispered. "We must see where that shadow leads." We slipped out after the figure, the fog swallowing us as we stepped into the alley behind the tavern. The air was thick with the smell of tar and river mud, and the distant lap of the Thames was the only sound beyond our cautious footsteps. The cloaked figure moved swiftly, their form barely discernible in the mist. Holmes moved like a cat, silent and sure, while I struggled to keep pace, my boots slipping on the wet cobblestones. The figure turned into a narrow lane, then vanished behind a stack of crates. Holmes paused, his hand raised to signal caution. "Careful, Watson," he whispered. "We are not alone." Before I could respond, a scuffle broke out ahead, a muffled cry, the thud of a body hitting the ground. Holmes darted forward, and I followed, my heart pounding. We found the lane empty, save for a torn scrap of paper fluttering on the ground, its edges singed. Holmes snatched it up, his magnifying glass already in hand. "A fragment of a letter," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "And look. Traces of a crimson seal, broken but unmistakable." I peered over his shoulder, noting the faint outline of a circle and dagger. "The same symbol," I said. "But where is the figure?" "Gone," Holmes said, his eyes scanning the shadows. "They were warned, perhaps, or sensed our pursuit, but this—" He held up the paper. "This confirms a connection to Buckingham Hall. We must return to 221B and analyze this fragment. And Baxter's alibi requires investigation. If he speaks the truth, our killer is still at large." We retraced our steps through the fog, the tavern's noise fading behind us. The scrap of paper, though small, felt like a beacon in the darkness of the case. Yet I could not shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the fog concealed not just our quarry but a deeper conspiracy. Holmes, however, was undaunted, his mind already weaving the threads of evidence into a pattern only he could see. As we hailed a cab back to Baker Street, I glanced at the river, its waters black and restless. "Holmes," I said, "do you think this society Baxter mentioned is behind Lord Reginald's death?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the gaslight. "It is too early to say, Watson, but the crimson seal, the mud, the letter, all point to a purpose beyond a simple quarrel. We have stumbled upon a web, and I intend to unravel it thread by thread." Chapter 5. The Cryptic Note. The fog that enveloped London seemed to follow us back to Buckingham Hall, as though determined to cloak the truth in its murky folds. Our venture to the rusty anchor had yielded a tantalizing clue. A torn scrap of paper bearing traces of the crimson circle and dagger symbol Lady Beatrice had described, but it had also raised more questions. Baxter's boast of a job at the Hall, his mention of a gentleman with a crimson seal, and his claim of being in jail the night of Lord Reginald's death suggested a complex web of intrigue. Sherlock Holmes, undeterred by the elusive cloaked figure who had vanished into the Westminster fog, was now resolute in his pursuit of answers within the walls of Buckingham Hall itself. We returned to Lord Reginald's study, a room that seemed to pulse with the echoes of his final days. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and the faint residue of his pipe tobacco, and the tall windows admitted only slivers of gray light through the persistent mist. Holmes moved with purpose, his keen eyes sweeping the room as he sought the missing letter Lady Beatrice had mentioned. "The study, Watson," he said, his voice low but vibrant with focus, "is the mind of a man laid bare. If Lord Reginald received a letter with a crimson seal, it was here, and its absence is as telling as its contents." I stood by the desk, my notebook open, though I felt more an observer than a contributor in the face of Holmes's relentless scrutiny. The desk was a chaos of papers, letters, bills, and a half-finished draft of a speech, but nothing bore the distinctive symbol we sought. Holmes, however, was undaunted. He ran his fingers along the edges of the desk, tapped the bookshelves, and even inspected the fireplace, where a few ashes lingered from a recent fire. "The letter was removed deliberately," he murmured, "but no man is so thorough as to erase every trace. There is always something left behind." His attention returned to the desk, where the scratched drawer we had noted earlier piqued his interest. He knelt, his magnifying glass poised, and examined the lock more closely. "The scratches are fresh, Watson," he said, "made with a crude tool, not a key. Someone forced this open, likely in haste." He produced his lock-picking tool and with a deft twist opened the drawer again. Inside we found only the blotting paper from our previous visit, but Holmes's eyes gleamed as he lifted it to the light. "This blotting paper absorbed the ink of something written here. Let us see what it reveals." He held the paper to the lamp, tilting it to catch the light at an angle. Faint, mirrored traces of writing appeared, fragmented but legible. "A partial impression," Holmes said, his voice quickening. "The words, 'debt' and 'must be paid' are clear. And here, look, Watson." He pointed to a smudged mark, barely discernible but unmistakable, the outline of a crimson circle with a dagger through it. I leaned closer, my heart quickening. "The same symbol Lady Beatrice described," I said. "This must be from the letter she saw." "Indeed," Holmes replied. "But the letter itself is gone, taken by someone who knew its significance. This blotting paper, however, confirms its existence and gives us a fragment of its message. The debt must be paid, a warning perhaps, or a demand. We must search further." Holmes's search became a meticulous dance, his hands moving over every surface of the study. He examined the bookshelves, pulling down volumes at random, and checked the undersides of drawers and the backs of picture frames. I watched, marveling at his patience, until he paused at a heavy oak bookcase near the window. "This shelf," he said, tapping it lightly, "is not flush with the wall. Observe the dust, disturbed here but not elsewhere." With a gentle push, he revealed a hidden panel, its hinges concealed behind a false panel of wood. The compartment was small, barely large enough for a few papers, but inside lay a single torn note, its edges frayed and its surface yellowed with age. Holmes lifted it carefully, holding it to the lamp. The crimson circle and dagger symbol was faint but unmistakable, and the words scrawled across it were chilling. The debt must be paid. The eye will not be denied. I stared at the note, a shiver running through me. The eye. What could that mean, Holmes? His eyes narrowed, his mind clearly racing. A reference, perhaps, to a symbol or an object of significance. The crimson circle and dagger suggest a secret society, likely one with roots in Lord Reginald's past. The phrase, "the eye will not be denied," implies a collective will, a group with a shared purpose. We must learn more of Lord Reginald's history, his time in the East India Company, perhaps, where such societies are not unknown. I nodded, recalling Lady Beatrice's mention of her brother's unease and his involvement in colonial affairs. Could this be tied to his wealth? A grudge from his days in India? Precisely, Watson, Holmes said, slipping the note into his pocket. The East India Company was a crucible of ambition and betrayal. Lord Reginald amassed wealth, but such fortunes often come at a cost. This note suggests a debt, literal or metaphorical, that someone sought to collect. But why now? And why with such violence? He moved to the window, gazing out at the fog-shrouded grounds. The mud on the steps, the blood, the letter, all point to a conspiracy that reaches beyond Buckingham Hall. The servants know more than they admit, particularly Emily and Grayson. And Charles Langley's quarrel with his cousin cannot be dismissed. We must tread carefully, Watson, for we are dealing with a foe who values secrecy above all. I glanced at the note, its cryptic words echoing in my mind. Should we confront the servants again? Emily's nervousness about the wine cellar? Not yet, Holmes interrupted, his tone firm. To press too soon is to scatter the pieces of the puzzle. We have the note, a tangible link to the Crimson Seal. Our next step is to verify Baxter's alibi and investigate Lord Reginald's past. The eye, whatever it is the key to this mystery. As we prepared to leave the study, I noticed a small detail Holmes had overlooked. A faint smudge of reddish mud on the carpet near the bookcase, identical to that on the marble steps. Holmes, I said, pointing. More of that Thames mud. Could someone have entered the study that night? Holmes knelt, examining the smudge with his magnifying glass. Well spotted, Watson. This mud confirms a connection between the steps and this room. Someone was here, likely after Lord Reginald's death, searching for this very note. The plot thickens. We descended the grand staircase, the bloodstain on the third step a grim reminder of our purpose. The fog outside had thickened, and the distant rumble of thunder added a foreboding note to the air. Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt weaving the threads of evidence. The mud, the note, the Crimson Seal, into a pattern only he could see. I, however, felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon me, the sense that Buckingham Hall was a house of secrets, each one more dangerous than the last. As we stepped into the hall, I glanced at the locked wine cellar door, recalling Emily's nervous glances. Holmes, I said, the cellar. Should we examine it now? He shook his head. In time, Watson. The cellar may hold answers, but the note is our immediate concern. We return to 221B to analyze its ink and paper, and we must send a telegram to Scotland Yard to confirm Baxter's jail alibi. The trail is warm, but it leads through treacherous fog. We hailed a hansom cab, the clatter of hooves a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the hall. As we rode back to Baker Street, the torn note seemed to burn a hole in Holmes's pocket, its cryptic message a beacon in the darkness of the case. I could not shake the feeling that the eye, whatever it was, watched us from the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. The discovery of the cryptic note in Lord Reginald Langley's study with its chilling message, "The debt must be paid. The eye will not be denied," had ignited Sherlock Holmes's imagination. The crimson circle and dagger symbol, coupled with the Thames mud and the blood-stained steps of Buckingham Hall, pointed to a conspiracy rooted in something deeper than a mere family quarrel. As we returned to 221B Baker Street, the fog seemed to cling to our cab, a silent accomplice to the mystery. Holmes was unusually quiet, his sharp features set in concentration, the torn note secure in his pocket. I, Dr. John Watson, felt the weight of the case pressing upon me, the words, "the eye," echoing like a warning from a forgotten past. At 221B, Holmes wasted no time. He lit the gas lamp on his cluttered desk, scattering papers and chemical apparatus to make room for his investigation. "Watson," he said, his voice crisp with purpose, "the note suggests a vendetta, possibly tied to Lord Reginald's days in the East India Company. The reference to the eye is no mere metaphor. It is a symbol, a rallying point for a group with a grievance. We must uncover his history in India, for therein lies the motive for his murder." I nodded, fetching a stack of old journals and correspondence from our shelves, many of which Holmes had collected during past cases involving colonial matters. "Lady Beatrice mentioned his wealth came from his time in India," I said. "Could this eye be connected to his fortune?" "Precisely," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming. "Wealth amassed in the colonies often carries a shadow: exploitation, betrayal, or theft. The crimson seal and the note's tone suggest a debt Lord Reginald owed, one that could not be settled with mere coin. Let us begin with his service record." Holmes dispatched a telegram to a contact at the India office, requesting records of Lord Reginald's tenure with the East India Company. While we awaited a reply, he turned to the note itself, examining it under a magnifying glass. "The paper is of Indian origin," he murmured, "handmade with traces of sandalwood in the fiber, a rarity in London. The ink is also distinctive, with a faint bluish tint common in Calcutta. This note was not written here, Watson, but brought from abroad, perhaps years ago." I leaned over, studying the faint script. Could it have been sent recently to threaten him? "Possible," Holmes said, "but the paper's age suggests it was kept, perhaps hidden, by Lord Reginald himself. The scratches on the desk drawer indicate someone else sought it after his death. We must learn what the eye is and why it demanded payment." Our inquiry was interrupted by the arrival of a thick envelope from the India office, delivered by a breathless messenger boy. Holmes tore it open, revealing a dossier on Lord Reginald Langley's service from 1865 to 1875. We spread the documents across the table, the flickering lamplight casting long shadows. The records painted a picture of a young, ambitious officer stationed in Calcutta, rising swiftly through the ranks due to his cunning and charm. He had overseen trade routes, negotiated with local merchants, and amassed a considerable fortune, much of it tied to the export of precious gems. Holmes's finger paused on a particular entry dated 1870. "Here, Watson," he said, his voice sharp. "A report of a scandal involving a stolen artifact, a ruby known as the Eye of Cayley, sacred to a sect in Bengal. Lord Reginald was implicated in its disappearance, but cleared due to lack of evidence. The case caused a stir, and several locals were imprisoned, though they protested their innocence." I frowned, the name resonating with the note's cryptic phrase. "The Eye of Cayley? Could that be the eye mentioned in the note?" Holmes nodded, his eyes alight with realization. "It is more than likely. The Eye of Kali was no mere gem. It was a symbol of divine protection to its keepers, a sect known for their secrecy and ruthlessness. If Lord Reginald stole it, or was believed to have stolen it, he would have made enemies who do not forget. The crimson circle and dagger may be their mark, a warning to those who cross them." I pictured a younger Lord Reginald standing in the bustling markets of Calcutta, his hands closing around a ruby that gleamed like blood. But why wait until now to act? He's been back in England for years. Holmes leaned back, lighting his pipe and sending a curl of smoke toward the ceiling. A vendetta, Watson, is patient. The sect may have lost track of him or waited for the right moment. The note suggests they believed he still possessed the eye or knew its whereabouts. His death was no random act. It was a reckoning. To deepen our understanding, Holmes turned to a worn volume on Indian antiquities, its pages yellowed but rich with detail. The book described the Eye of Kali as a fist-sized ruby said to be imbued with spiritual power, guarded by a sect known as the Order of the Crimson Veil. Their symbol, a circle pierced by a dagger, matched the note exactly. The Order, Holmes read aloud, is rumored to pursue those who defile their sacred relics, even across continents. They are meticulous, operating in shadows, and their vengeance is precise. I shivered, the room suddenly colder. A secret society, then, hunting Lord Reginald across decades, but how did they find him? Holmes's eyes narrowed. That, Watson, is what we must uncover. The Thames mud on the steps suggests a local agent, someone familiar with London's underbelly. Baxter's mention of a gentleman with a crimson seal at the rusty anchor points to a coordinator. Perhaps a member of the Order or their emissary. We must verify his alibi, but I suspect he is a peripheral figure. The true killer is closer to Buckingham Hall. I recalled Emily's nervous glances at the wine cellar door and Grayson's guarded demeanor. Could one of the servants be involved? Emily seemed frightened and Grayson was almost too composed. Holmes nodded. Both bear watching. The mud in the study, identical to that on the steps, suggests someone moved between the crime scene and Lord Reginald's private quarters. The cellar, too, may hold answers. Its locked door is too convenient a mystery. But first, we must trace the Order's presence in London. Holmes dispatched another telegram, this time to a contact in the British Museum's Antiquities Department, inquiring about recent activity linked to Indian artifacts or sects. As we awaited a response, he paced the room, his mind weaving connections. "Consider the sequence, Watson," he said. Lord Reginald receives a threatening note, grows agitated, quarrels with his cousin Charles over an inheritance, and is then found dead with Thames mud near his body. The note is taken, but its impression remains on the blotting paper, and a second copy is hidden in the study. Someone in the house knew of the note's significance and sought to conceal it. I frowned, piecing it together. Could Charles be involved? His quarrel with Lord Reginald? A possibility, Holmes interrupted, but too obvious. The mud and the note point to an external force, though one with inside help. Charles may be a pawn or a distraction. We need more data. The reply from the British Museum arrived swiftly, detailing rumors of a recent influx of Indian artifacts on London's black market, some linked to a shadowy group using a crimson seal. One name stood out, a dealer known as Mr. Vikram operating near the docks. Vikram, Holmes mused. A name to pursue. He may be our gentleman from Baxter's tale. As night fell, the fog outside thickened, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed our growing unease. The Eye of Kali, the Order of the Crimson Veil, the crimson-sealed note, all pointed to a vendetta born in the heat of colonial India, now playing out in the cold streets of London. Holmes's determination was unshaken, but I felt the shadow of the Order looming over us, its gaze as piercing as the ruby it sought. Chapter 7. The False Confession. The trail of clues in the murder of Lord Reginald Langley had grown ever more intricate, each revelation pulling Sherlock Holmes and me deeper into a web of deception. The cryptic note found in the study, with its ominous reference to the eye and the crimson circle and dagger symbol, had pointed us to Lord Reginald's past in the East India Company and the stolen ruby known as the Eye of Kali. The Thames mud on the marble steps, the tampered desk drawer, and the nervous glances of the maid Emily all suggested a conspiracy that reached from the docks of Westminster to the heart of Buckingham Hall. Yet as we returned to the hall that evening, a new development awaited us, one that threatened to upend our investigation. Holmes and I had spent the afternoon at 221B Baker Street analyzing the note's ink and paper, confirming its Indian origin, and cross-referencing records of the Order of the Crimson Veil, the sect tied to the Eye of Cayley. A telegram from Scotland Yard had verified Baxter's alibi. He had indeed been in jail the night of the murder, ruling him out as the killer but not as a witness to the broader plot. The mention of a gentleman with a crimson seal lingered in my mind, as did the possibility that someone within the household, perhaps Emily or the butler, Mr. Grayson, was complicit. Holmes, however, cautioned against hasty conclusions, insisting we needed more evidence. We arrived at Buckingham Hall as dusk deepened the fog, the manor's silhouette looming like a spectre against the gray sky. Lady Beatrice greeted us in the grand hall, her face pale but composed. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something terrible has happened. My cousin Charles, he has confessed to Reginald's murder." I stared, taken aback. "Confessed? But why? And when?" "This afternoon," she replied, wringing her hands. "He came to me in a state of distress, saying he could no longer bear the guilt. He's in the drawing room now, waiting to speak with you. Inspector Lestrade is with him." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his expression one of guarded skepticism. "A confession at this juncture is most convenient," he murmured. "Come, Watson, let us hear what Mr. Charles Langley has to say." We entered the drawing room, a spacious chamber adorned with portraits and heavy furniture, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill outside. Charles Langley sat in an armchair by the fire, his once handsome features haggard, his eyes red from weeping. His suit was rumpled as though he had not changed since the previous day, and his hands trembled as he clutched a glass of brandy. Inspector Lestrade stood nearby, his notebook open, his expression a mix of triumph and unease. The servants, Grayson, Emily, and Mrs. Harrow, hovered at the edges of the room, their faces a study in shock and suspicion. Holmes took his place before Charles, his posture relaxed but his gaze piercing. "Mr. Langley," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "I understand you have confessed to the murder of your cousin, Lord Reginald. Pray tell me the particulars." Charles raised his head, his voice hoarse. I killed him, Mr. Holmes. It was the night before last in the grand hall. We quarreled over the inheritance, as Emily told you. Reginald was to leave the bulk of his fortune to Beatrice, cutting me out entirely. I was furious. I'd had too much to drink, and I followed him to the staircase. I struck him, and he fell. The blood, he choked, burying his face in his hands. I didn't mean to kill him, but I did. I can't live with the guilt any longer. I scribbled notes, my mind racing. Charles's confession aligned with Emily's account of their quarrel, yet something felt amiss. The mud, the note, the crimson seal, these did not fit a drunken act of passion. I glanced at Holmes, whose expression betrayed no surprise, only a quiet intensity. Lestrade stepped forward, clearing his throat. "There you have it, Holmes. A clear confession. The case is closed. I'll take Mr. Langley into custody." Holmes raised a hand, his voice cutting through the room. "Not so fast, Lestrade. A confession is only as good as the facts that support it. Mr. Langley, describe the weapon you used to strike your cousin." Charles hesitated, his eyes darting to Lestrade. I used my hand. A blow to the head. He staggered and fell down the steps. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint sardonic smile. "A blow with your hand, you say? Curious. The injury to Lord Reginald's skull, as Dr. Watson can attest, suggests a heavy, blunt object, not a fist. And tell me, Mr. Langley, how do you account for the Thames mud found on the steps when you claim to have been indoors all evening? Charles paled, his hands trembling more violently. I don't know about any mud. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking clearly. And the chipped railing? Holmes pressed, pacing slowly before him. The irregular bloodstain inconsistent with a fall? The missing letter with the crimson circle and dagger? Your confession, Mr. Langley, is a noble gesture, but it does not align with the evidence. I glanced at Lady Beatrice, who stood frozen, her eyes wide with confusion. Charles, she whispered, why are you saying this? You couldn't have... I did, Charles snapped, his voice breaking. I killed him, Beatrice. Let it be done. Holmes stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on Charles. A noble sacrifice, perhaps, to protect someone else. But the facts betray you. Watson, examine Mr. Langley's boots, if you please. I knelt beside Charles, who recoiled but allowed me to inspect his footwear. The soles were clean, bearing only the dust of the house, not the distinctive reddish clay of the Thames. No mud, Holmes, I said, rising. And his boots show no signs of recent outdoor wear. Holmes nodded, his eyes never leaving Charles. As I thought. The mud on the steps came from an external source, not from you. And your physique, slight, unaccustomed to physical exertion, could not have delivered the force required to fracture a skull so severely. No, Mr. Langley, you are no murderer. But you know something, and you are shielding someone. Who? Charles's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. I can't say, he whispered. I won't. Just take me away, Inspector. Lestrade hesitated, glancing at Holmes. He's confessed, Holmes. What more do you want? Truth, Holmes replied sharply. The confession is a red herring, Lestrade, designed to halt our inquiry. Someone in this house, or beyond it, wants us to believe the case is solved. But the mud, the note, the eye of Kali, these point to a deeper motive, one tied to Lord Reginald's past in India. I looked at the servants, who stood in uneasy silence. Emily's eyes were fixed on the floor, her hands twisting her apron, while Grayson's face remained impassive, though his knuckles whitened around his keyring. Mrs. Harrow shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting to the door. The room felt charged with secrets, each person a potential link in the chain. Holmes turned to Lady Beatrice. Madam, has your cousin shown any signs of guilt before today? Any behavior to suggest he was capable of murder? She shook her head, her voice soft. No, Mr. Holmes. Charles was angry about the inheritance, but he loved Reginald. They were like brothers. This makes no sense. Holmes's eyes softened briefly, but his resolve was unshaken. Then we must look elsewhere. Mr. Grayson, you mentioned locking all doors that night, yet mud was found and a letter was taken. Have you any explanation? Grayson's jaw tightened. I've told you, sir, the house was secure. I know nothing of mud or letters. Holmes's gaze lingered on him, then shifted to Emily. And you, Emily? You were quick to mention the quarrel. Is there more you wish to say? The maid flinched, her eyes darting to the locked wine cellar door just visible through the hall. No, sir, she whispered. I've told you all I know. Holmes said nothing, but I knew he marked her unease. He turned back to Charles. Mr. Langley, your confession is noted, but I advise you to reconsider. The true killer remains at large, and your silence protects them. Watson, we shall return to the hall tomorrow. There are yet secrets to uncover. As we left the drawing room, the fog seemed to press closer, the gas lamps casting long, distorted shadows. Charles's confession had muddied the waters, but Holmes's clarity cut through the deception. The eye of Cayley, the crimson seal, the Thames mud. These were the threads of truth, and I trusted Holmes to weave them into a solution. Chapter 8. The Midnight Vigil. The false confession of Charles Langley had cast a pall over our investigation into Lord Reginald Langley's murder, but Sherlock Holmes was not one to be swayed by convenient deceptions. As we departed Buckingham Hall that evening, the fog thickening like a conspirator's cloak, Holmes's mind was already turning to the next phase of our pursuit. "Watson," he said, his voice a sharp whisper in the cab back to 221B Baker Street, "Charles' admission is a shield, not a sword. It protects the true culprit, and I suspect that culprit will act tonight. The eye of Cayley remains hidden, and the order of the Crimson Veil will not rest until it is reclaimed. We must return to the hall under cover of darkness, a midnight vigil to catch our shadow in the act." I nodded, my pulse quickening at the prospect. The pieces of the puzzle, the Thames mud, the cryptic note demanding the debt must be paid, the chipped railing and the nervous servant Emily's glances at the wine cellar door, formed a pattern only Holmes could fully discern. Charles's tearful insistence on his guilt rang hollow against the evidence, and Lestrade's premature satisfaction with the confession only fueled Holmes's resolve. "A vigil it is, then," I replied. "But how shall we proceed without alerting the household?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim cab light. "Discretion, Watson. We shall arrive after the house is abed, concealed in the grounds. The steps are the key, the site of the crime, marked by blood and mud. If the killer returns to retrieve the eye or leave a message, it will be there. Bring your revolver. The fog hides many dangers." By 10 o'clock that night, we were once more at Buckingham Hall, the manor a silent sentinel in the moonless gloom. The fog had deepened into an impenetrable veil, muffling the distant toll of Westminster's bells and turning the gas lamps along the drive into hazy orbs. We slipped through the wrought iron gates, which creaked softly under Holmes's careful touch, and made our way to a thick hedge bordering the entrance. There we crouched, our dark coats blending with the shadows, our breaths shallow to avoid detection. The grand marble steps loomed before us, the third step's dark stain barely visible in the gloom, a grim monument to Lord Reginald's final moments. Holmes adjusted his deerstalker cap, his magnifying glass tucked into his pocket alongside a small lantern. "Observe, Watson," he whispered. "The fog is our ally tonight. It conceals us, but it will not conceal our quarry. Listen for footsteps. The gravel path betrays all who tread it." I gripped my revolver, the cold metal a comfort against the chill that seeped through my greatcoat. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and river mist carried from the nearby Thames. Minutes stretched into hours, marked only by the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves in the wind. My limbs ached from the cramped position, but Holmes remained statue still, his senses attuned to the night. It was nearing midnight when the first anomaly occurred. A faint crunch of gravel, deliberate and cautious, approaching from the direction of the servants' entrance. Holmes's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "There," he breathed. "Not a servant. The gate is too hesitant." From the fog emerged a cloaked figure shrouded in black wool that blended seamlessly with the mist. The figure moved with practiced stealth, hugging the shadows of the hall's facade, a small parcel clutched in one gloved hand. They paused at the base of the steps, glancing about like a fox scenting hounds, then ascended slowly, testing each step as if fearing a trap. Holmes tensed beside me. "The third step," he murmured. "Watch." The figure knelt on the blood-stained marble, placing the parcel down with reverence. It was a letter sealed with crimson wax bearing the unmistakable circle and dagger. With a small tool, perhaps a knife, the figure pried at the edge of the step, revealing a hidden crevice beneath a loose stone. They inserted the letter, then replaced the stone, smoothing the surface with a gloved hand. "By Jove," I whispered, "a dead drop." Holmes nodded, his eyes alight. Precisely. A message for an accomplice. We move now. But before we could advance, the figure straightened abruptly, as if sensing our presence. They whirled, the hood falling back to reveal not a stranger, but Emily, the young maid, her face pale with terror in the faint gaslight. Her eyes widened as she spotted our silhouettes emerging from the hedge. "Emily," Holmes called softly, stepping forward with hands raised. "Do not flee. You are caught in a game far deadlier than you know." She froze, the knife trembling in her hand, tears streaking her cheeks. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, please, I didn't mean—" "Run!" came a harsh whisper from the shadows near the servants' door. It was Mr. Grayson, the butler, his face gaunt in the gloom, a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. "Foolish girl!" Emily bolted toward the hall, but Holmes was faster. In 3 strides, he intercepted her, gently but firmly grasping her arm. "Easy, child," he said. "You are safe with us." Grayson fired a warning shot into the air, the crack echoing like thunder. "Stay back, Holmes. This is no affair of yours." Holmes released Emily, who collapsed sobbing at his feet, and faced Grayson unflinchingly. "On the contrary, Grayson, it is entirely my affair." The Eye of Cayley. The ruby Lord Reginald stole from the Order of the Crimson Veil. You are its guardian here in London, are you not? And Emily your unwilling messenger. Grayson's face twisted in fury, but he did not fire again. "You know nothing. The debt must be paid." I leveled my revolver at him, heart pounding. "Drop the pistol, Grayson. The game is up." With a curse, Grayson tossed the weapon aside and fled into the fog, his footsteps fading toward the stables. Holmes knelt beside Emily, his voice gentle. "Tell us everything, Emily, for your sake and Charles's." Sobbing, she nodded. "It was Mr. Grayson, sir. He forced me. Said my family would suffer if I didn't deliver the letters. The Crimson Seal ones. He's part of that society, the ones from India. Lord Reginald stole their ruby years ago, hid it here. Grayson was to retrieve it after the murder, but you came too soon." "And the murder?" Holmes pressed. "Not Grayson," she whispered. "He planned it, but—" Oh God, it was Lady Beatrice. She struck Reginald in rage over the inheritance quarrel. Grayson covered it up with the mud from the Thames to make it look like an outsider. Charles confessed to protect her, his love for her, unspoken. Holmes's eyes widened fractionally, the first crack in his composure. "Lady Beatrice? The client herself?" Emily nodded miserably. "The letter in the crevice, its instructions from the Order. They want the eye, or her life." I stared, stunned. The elegant Lady Beatrice, a killer? It shattered the image we had held. Holmes rose, retrieving the letter from the step. Breaking the seal, he read swiftly by lantern light. "The eye awaits at Westminster Bridge midnight tomorrow. Bring it or the veil descends." "Westminster Bridge," Holmes said. "Our next rendezvous, but first we secure the hall." We escorted Emily inside, where the household stirred at the commotion. Lady Beatrice appeared at the top of the stairs, her face a mask of feigned concern. "Mr. Holmes, what is the meaning—" "Your game ends here, Lady Beatrice," Holmes interrupted coldly. "Emily has confessed all. The blow, the mud, the false trail, it was you." She descended slowly, her composure cracking. "Reginald deserved it. He cheated us all, me, Charles, even the Order. The ruby was our fortune. And Charles took the blame for love," Holmes said, "a tragic folly." As Lestrade arrived, summoned by the shot, Holmes handed over the letter. "Arrest Lady Beatrice for murder, Grayson for conspiracy. The eye remains hidden, for now." The fog lifted slightly as dawn broke, revealing the steps in harsh light. Holmes pocketed a small ruby glinting from the crevice, the Eye of Cayley, retrieved at last. But Grayson had escaped into the mist, and the Order's shadow lingered. Chapter 9. The Web Unravels. The midnight vigil at Buckingham Hall had shaken the foundations of our investigation into Lord Reginald Langley's murder. The revelation that Lady Beatrice, our client, was the killer with Mr. Grayson, the butler, as her conspirator tied to the Order of the Crimson Veil, had upended all assumptions. Emily's tearful confession, Charles's false admission to protect his cousin, and the discovery of the Eye of Cayley, a ruby hidden in the marble steps, had brought us tantalizingly close to the truth. Yet Grayson's escape into the fog, with the threat of the Order looming, meant the case was far from closed. As Sherlock Holmes and I returned to 221B Baker Street, the crimson-sealed letter from the vigil burned in my mind, its message pointing to a rendezvous at Westminster Bridge. The web was unraveling, but its final threads remained elusive. In our rooms, Holmes wasted no time. He cleared the cluttered table, spreading out a detailed map of London and pinning key locations, Buckingham Hall, the Rusty Anchor, and Westminster Bridge, with red string to mark their connections. The torn note from the study, the blotting paper's impressions, and the letter from the vigil lay before us, each bearing the crimson circle and dagger symbol of the Order. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice sharp with focus, "we stand at the precipice of clarity. The mud, the ruby, the false confession, all are threads in a single tapestry. Tonight, we weave them together." I sat at the desk, my notebook open, struggling to keep pace with Holmes's relentless logic. "Lady Beatrice struck the fatal blow," I said, piecing it together. "But Grayson orchestrated the cover-up, using the Thames mud to suggest an outsider. And Charles confessed to shield her. But what of the Eye of Cayley? Why kill for it now after all these years?" Holmes pinned a final string to Westminster Bridge, his eyes gleaming. "The eye is the heart of the matter, Watson. Lord Reginald stole it from the Order of the Crimson Veil during his time in India, believing it a mere gem to fund his fortune. But to the Order it is a sacred relic, a symbol of their power. The note, 'The debt must be paid, the eye will not be denied,' was their ultimatum. Reginald's refusal to return it sealed his fate." I frowned, recalling the dossier from the India office. "But why wait so long? He's been in London for over a decade." Holmes lit his pipe, a curl of smoke rising like a thought taking form. "The Order is patient, Watson. They likely lost track of him after he left India, his wealth and title shielding him. But recent events, perhaps his public speeches or a careless mention of the ruby, alerted them to his presence. The crimson-sealed letters were warnings, escalating to murder when he defied them." He pointed to the map. "The Thames mud links the crime to the docks, where Baxter spoke of a gentleman with a crimson seal. Grayson, a member of the Order, used his position as butler to monitor Reginald, planting the mud to divert suspicion. Emily, coerced by threats to her family, delivered their messages. But Lady Beatrice's role was personal. She killed Reginald in a moment of rage, not for the Order, but over the inheritance dispute." I nodded, the pieces falling into place. Charles's confession was to protect Beatrice, his unrequited love. But Grayson's escape, where is he now? Holmes's gaze shifted to the letter from the vigil, its message stark. "The eye awaits at Westminster Bridge, midnight tomorrow. Bring it, or the veil descends." "Grayson fled with knowledge of the ruby's location," he said. "He hid it in the steps, believing it safe until he could deliver it to the Order. When we caught Emily, he panicked, firing to distract us. He is likely en route to Westminster Bridge, where the Order expects the eye." I glanced at the ruby, now resting on the table, its deep red facets catching the lamplight like a drop of blood. "We have the eye," I said. "Should we take it to the bridge ourselves?" Holmes's lips curved into a faint smile. "A tempting gambit, but dangerous. The Order is ruthless, and Grayson's desperation makes him unpredictable. Instead, we shall use the rendezvous to trap them. But first, we must confirm the motive. why Beatrice acted and how Grayson manipulated her. Holmes turned to a stack of letters we had retrieved from the study, including the blotting paper with its faint impressions. Using a mirror, he deciphered more of the original note's text. "The eye is hidden in the heart of the hall. Surrender it or all will fall." The heart of the hall, Holmes mused. The marble steps, central to the house. Grayson knew this, but Beatrice did not. Her rage was her own, but Grayson seized the opportunity to frame it as the order's work. I frowned, recalling Emily's fear. Grayson coerced Emily with threats to her family. Could he have manipulated Beatrice similarly? Holmes nodded. Likely. Beatrice's inheritance dispute provided the spark, but Grayson fanned the flame, perhaps hinting at the order's wrath to push her to act. Her strike was impulsive, but the cover-up, mud, moved candlestick, stolen letter, was Grayson's design. To test this theory, Holmes dispatched a telegram to Lestrade requesting a background check on Grayson's history. The reply arrived swiftly. Grayson, born in Calcutta to a British father and Indian mother, had served in the East India Company before joining the Langley household. His ties to India suggested a connection to the order, likely as a low-ranking member tasked with recovering the eye. Holmes paced, his mind racing. Grayson's dual heritage made him the perfect agent, trusted in the household, loyal to the order. He used Beatrice's anger, planting the mud to suggest an intruder, and relied on Charles' love to muddy the waters further with his confession. But the ruby's discovery has forced his hand. I glanced at the map, the red strings converging on Westminster Bridge. What's our plan for tomorrow night? Confront Grayson and the order? Holmes's eyes gleamed with anticipation. We shall observe, Watson, not confront. The bridge is a public place, easily watched. We'll station ourselves nearby with Lestrade's men at a distance. Grayson will come, expecting to deliver the eye, or perhaps to flee with it. The order's representative will reveal themselves, and we shall have them both. I felt a chill, not from the fog, but from the audacity of the plan. And if the order is as ruthless as you say, then we must be swifter, Holmes replied, checking his revolver. The eye is our bait, but knowledge is our weapon. Grayson's desperation and Beatrice's betrayal have exposed the order's hand. We are close, Watson, closer than they know. As midnight approached, Holmes spread out his notes, connecting every clue. The mud from the Thames traced to the docks where Baxter spoke of the Crimson Seal. The note in the study hidden behind a secret panel. Emily's coerced deliveries, Charles's false confession, and Beatrice's impulsive act, manipulated by Grayson's scheming. The eye of Cayley, a ruby stolen in India, was the linchpin, its theft the spark for a vendetta that crossed continents. I looked at the ruby, its glow almost malevolent. Holmes, what if the order has more agents in London? Could we be walking into a trap? He smiled, unperturbed. A risk, Watson, but one we are prepared for. The fog that hides them also hides us. Tomorrow at Westminster Bridge the web unravels fully. The clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing in the quiet room. Outside, the fog pressed closer, but within, Holmes's clarity burned like a beacon. I felt the weight of the case, Lady Beatrice's betrayal, Grayson's flight, the order's shadow. But with Holmes at my side, I knew the truth was within reach. Chapter 10. The Final Deduction. The web of deceit surrounding Lord Reginald Langley's murder had nearly unraveled. Its threads, Thames mud, the crimson-sealed note, Charles's false confession, and Lady Beatrice's betrayal, woven into a pattern only Sherlock Holmes could fully discern. The midnight vigil had exposed Mr. Grayson as a conspirator of the Order of the Crimson Veil, and the eye of Cayley, a stolen ruby hidden in the marble steps, was now in our possession. The cryptic letter from the vigil pointed to a rendezvous at Westminster Bridge, where Grayson, having fled into the fog, was likely to meet the order's emissary. Yet as we prepared to confront this final act, Holmes insisted on one last gathering at Buckingham Hall to lay bare the truth before all. We arrived at the hall under a sky where the fog was at last thinning, its oppressive weight giving way to faint moonlight. The grand hall was a fitting stage for Holmes's denouement, its ancestral portraits seeming to watch as we assembled the key players. Lady Beatrice, her face a mask of defiance despite her guilt. Charles Langley, haggard from his false confession. Emily the maid, her eyes red from tears. Mrs. Harrow the cook, hovering nervously. And Inspector Lestrade, skeptical but attentive. Grayson, apprehended by Lestrade's men near the docks after a desperate chase, stood handcuffed, his gaunt face set in grim resignation. Holmes took his place at the center, the eye of Kali in his hand, its deep red facets catching the light like a malevolent star. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonant with authority, "we stand tonight in the shadow of a crime that sought to hide in the fog of deception. Lord Reginald Langley was murdered not by accident, but by a calculated act fueled by greed, vengeance, and a relic from a distant past. Allow me to unravel the truth." I stood by the fireplace, my notebook ready, marveling at Holmes's ability to command a room. He held up the ruby, its glow silencing the murmurs. "This is the Eye of Kali, stolen by Lord Reginald in 1870 from a sacred sect in Bengal, the Order of the Crimson Veil. Its theft sparked a vendetta that crossed continents, culminating in his death on these very steps." Lady Beatrice's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Holmes continued, his gaze sweeping the room. The evidence was clear from the start, though cunningly obscured. The blood on the third step was irregular, not the uniform pool of a fall, suggesting a blow followed by movement. The chipped railing indicated a struggle, and the Thames mud, distinctive reddish clay from the docks, had no place in a house locked tight, as Mr. Grayson assured us. Grayson shifted, his eyes darting to the floor. Holmes pressed on. "The mud was our first clue leading us to the rusty anchor where a man named Baxter spoke of a gentleman with a crimson seal. Baxter's alibi held. He was in jail, but his words pointed to the order. A torn note in Lord Reginald's study, hidden behind a secret panel, bore the symbol of a crimson circle and dagger and the words, 'The debt must be paid. The eye will not be denied.'" He turned to Emily, who flinched under his gaze. Emily, coerced by threats to her family, delivered messages for the order, unaware of their full import. Her nervousness betrayed her, particularly her glances at the wine cellar door. But it was the steps, not the cellar, that held the true secret, the eye, hidden in a crevice. Holmes's eyes locked on Lady Beatrice. Yet the murder itself was not the order's doing. Lady Beatrice, you struck your brother in a moment of rage over the inheritance dispute. You believed he was cutting you out, favoring Charles. Your blow was impulsive but lethal. Beatrice's composure cracked, her voice a whisper. "He betrayed me, Mr. Holmes. The fortune was to be ours, shared. I lost control." Holmes nodded, his expression stern but not unkind. "You did, but the cover-up was not your work. Mr. Grayson, a member of the order, saw an opportunity. He planted the Thames mud to suggest an outsider, moved the candlestick to obscure the scene, and stole the threatening letter to protect the order's secrecy. He manipulated your guilt, Beatrice, hinting at the order's wrath to keep you silent." Grayson's face twisted in defiance. "You've no proof, Holmes. The order will not be stopped." Holmes held up the crimson-sealed letter from the vigil. "This is proof, Grayson. Your attempt to retrieve the eye at the steps, your shot to cover your escape, and this letter demanding the ruby's delivery at Westminster Bridge. You were to meet the order's emissary, a man named Vikram, whose dealings in Indian artifacts we traced to the docks." Lestrade stirred, his skepticism waning. Vikram? We've had reports of him. Shady dealer, always slipping through our grasp. Holmes nodded. Indeed, but Grayson's flight was his undoing. Lestrade's men apprehended him near the docks and the ruby was secured. The order's plan failed, but their shadow remains. He turned to Charles, whose face was etched with pain. Mr. Langley, your confession was a noble sacrifice, born of love for your cousin, but it was unnecessary. The truth could not be hidden. Charles's voice broke. I thought I could save her. Holmes's gaze softened. You tried, but the truth is a relentless hunter. Lady Beatrice, you will face justice for murder. Grayson for conspiracy and aiding the order. The Eye of Cayley will be returned to its rightful keepers, though I suspect the order will not rest. He held the ruby aloft, its light casting eerie shadows. This gem, a symbol of greed and vengeance, drove men and women to betrayal. It reminds us that obsession blinds us to reason, leading us into darkness. I scribbled his words, feeling the weight of his reflection. The hall was silent save for the crackle of the fire and the click of Lestrade's handcuffs as he secured Beatrice and Grayson. Emily wept quietly, relieved of her burden, while Mrs. Harrow stood stunned, the reality of the household's secret sinking in. Holmes turned to me, his voice low. Watson, the case is closed, but the order's reach troubles me. Vikram remains at large, and the crimson veil may yet strike again. I nodded, the ruby's glow lingering in my mind. A moral lesson, Holmes. Greed and vengeance destroy more than their targets. Indeed, he said, pocketing the eye. Let us return to Baker Street. The fog lifts, but new mysteries await. As we stepped into the night, the fog had indeed parted, revealing a sky pricked with stars. Buckingham Hall stood behind us, its secrets laid bare, but the shadow of the order lingered in my thoughts. Holmes, however, walked with his usual confidence, the ruby safe in his possession, his mind already turning to the next challenge. Philosophical reflection. In our pursuit of justice, we must guard against the shadows within, greed, anger, pride, that lead us astray. The Eye of Cayley, though beautiful, was a beacon of destruction, a reminder that true wealth lies in reason and compassion, not in treasures stained with blood.